For years, the world has seen Princess Catherine as the radiant face of the monarchy, graceful, unshakable, and untouchable. But behind palace doors, a devastating truth was buried. A truth so heartbreaking that even her closest family struggled to face it. Tonight, that curtain falls, and what emerges is not the flawless fairy tale we thought we knew, but the silent battle Catherine has carried alone. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine's image has always been carefully sculpted for the public eye. To the millions who adored her, she was a symbol of resilience, a woman who seemed to glide effortlessly through the pressures of royal life. Whether she was greeting world leaders, comforting children, or standing proudly beside her husband, she exuded the aura of someone untouchable. Yet, the truth was far more complicated. Behind the dazzling gowns and radiant smiles was a woman who was quietly breaking under the enormous weight of expectation. This contrast between public perception and private reality became the foundation of her hidden struggle. Palace aides would whisper about moments when Catherine's strength faltered, but those whispers were drowned out by the roar of tradition and duty. The monarchy thrives on the illusion of perfection, and so the smallest cracks were painted over, hidden behind carefully staged photographs and rigidly orchestrated appearances. Catherine herself played her role flawlessly, never allowing the mask to slip in front of flashing cameras. But even the strongest mask cannot be worn forever. Those closest to her, William, her children, even a handful of trusted aides, sensed the shadows that crept behind her smile. Subtle changes gave them away. A moment of hesitation before entering a crowded room, a sigh of exhaustion disguised as composure, a silence that lingered too long after laughter faded. These were not the signs of weakness the palace would admit to the public. They were the quiet indicators of a battle being fought in secret, and in choosing silence, the monarchy gave the illusion more power than the truth itself. The decision to hide her reality was not born from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of damaging the monarchy's pristine image. Fear of unsettling a nation that idolized Catherine as the perfect princess. Fear of revealing that even the crown could not shield its wearers from human struggle. But secrecy is a dangerous weapon. What begins as protection can quickly turn into betrayal, leaving the very person it was meant to shield isolated and alone. Catherine, more than anyone, understood this cruel paradox. To appear strong, she had to suffer in silence. Still, within that silence lay a dangerous truth. For every public moment of elegance, there was a private moment of despair. For every polished appearance, there was a hidden collapse when the cameras turned away. And with every passing day, the weight grew heavier, pressing her into a corner from which escape seemed impossible. Her struggle was not just a private pain, it was a time bomb ticking beneath the foundations of the monarchy itself. Because when silence is forced to carry the burden of suffering, it does not fade, it festers. And when it finally breaks free, it does so with devastating force, shaking everything in its path. Catherine's hidden battle would one day erupt into the open, not only altering her own destiny, but threatening to redefine the future of the crown itself. But to understand the full weight of Catherine's struggle, we must uncover how the cracks first began to show, hidden beneath layers of duty and silence. It didn't start with a dramatic moment. It began quietly, almost invisibly. Catherine's luminous smile remained, but those closest to her noticed the silence in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice. These were not accidents of exhaustion. They were warnings, ignored at a perilous cost. In those early days, the signs were so subtle they almost seemed unworthy of attention. During grand ceremonies and glittering state dinners, Catherine moved with the same elegance that had defined her from the start. Yet, if one looked closely, there were fleeting shadows. A pause before answering a question. A fleeting glance downward, as though her thoughts were drifting elsewhere. To the public, these were easily overlooked, dismissed as nothing more than the toll of an overfull calendar. But to those in the palace who truly watched her, they were the beginning of something no one wanted to admit. Behind the walls of Kensington and Windsor, private conversations began to stir. A trusted aide recalled moments where Catherine would retreat into silence, her energy drained after long engagements. Another remembered how she would linger in hallways, staring as though caught between two worlds, the one she was expected to uphold and the one that threatened to consume her. These accounts, quietly exchanged between staff and whispered behind closed doors, revealed a woman fighting fatigue deeper than mere weariness. The emotional toll was immense. As a mother, Catherine gave her children all of herself, every ounce of love, energy, and devotion. As a royal, she was expected to give the same to an entire nation. It was a dual burden that no ordinary person could balance without consequence. Late nights, comforting her children, were followed by early mornings of public duty. Behind the glamour of her gowns was the unrelenting pressure of perfection, and each day, the cost of maintaining that balance grew heavier. Still, the whispers never reached the outside world. Palace aides exchanged glances, muttering, "Something is wrong," but when it came time to act, they were paralyzed. For the monarchy, perception was everything. The slightest admission of struggle threatened to shatter the carefully guarded illusion of strength. And so, they chose silence, convincing themselves that Catherine's struggle would fade on its own. The media, too, played its part. Now and then, speculation arose, questions about her health, curiosity about her unusual silences, but these were quickly dismissed as idle gossip. Headlines moved on, and the truth was buried deeper, beneath a mountain of denial and distraction. The public was given glossy photographs and polished interviews, each one another brick in the wall, hiding Catherine's reality. This was the palace's strategy. Hide the storm, no matter the cost. Protect the crown, even if it meant sacrificing the person wearing it. But storms cannot be hidden forever. They grow in silence, gaining strength until the first crack splits the sky. Yet denial only made the storm grow stronger, and soon the royal family would no longer be able to contain what Catherine was hiding. The monarchy thrives on perfection, but perfection is built on silence. And when silence becomes denial, tragedy is never far away. Inside the palace walls, Catherine's struggle was known yet unspoken. Those who should have acted turned away, fearing the fallout of the truth. For centuries, the crown has demanded sacrifice, insisting that image must outweigh humanity. To falter publicly was unthinkable. To confess weakness, nearly unforgivable. Catherine became another casualty of this rigid code. Every sign of her distress was smoothed over, every hesitation erased, every whisper of struggle dismissed as fleeting fatigue. To the outside world, she remained immaculate, a flawless emblem of duty. Inside the palace, however, the truth hung heavy in the air, like a storm about to break. Camilla, ever calculating, approached the matter with detachment. Her caution was not born of cruelty but of strategy. To her, Catherine's struggle was not a personal crisis, it was a potential liability. She feared that acknowledging it would unravel the monarchy's carefully built armor. And so, her response was distance, silence, and a cold refusal to let compassion cloud the institution's survival. For her, preservation of the crown always outweighed the suffering of the individual. But William could not separate the roles so easily. As heir, he bore the responsibility of future kings. As a husband, he carried the anguish of watching the woman he loved fade behind her polished smile. His heart pulled in two directions, toward protecting Catherine and toward protecting the monarchy. The pressure of balancing love with duty fractured him, leaving him paralyzed at the very moment Catherine needed him most. His silence, though rooted in fear, became its own form of betrayal. Then there was Princess Anne, whose instincts were rarely wrong. She saw through the glossy facade long before others dared to admit the truth. Anne, hardened by years of her own sacrifices, recognized the signs of a woman on the edge. Her warnings, though quiet, echoed with urgency. But even her voice was drowned out by the machinery of an institution that had perfected the art of denial. Compassion was treated as weakness, and in the relentless march of protocol, Catherine's pain was simply collateral damage. And so the palace carried on, its gleaming halls echoing with denial. Smiles were rehearsed, appearances maintained, while behind closed doors, Catherine's reality grew heavier and harder to disguise. Every choice made in silence tightened the noose of inevitability. Because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of forcing itself into the light. And when it comes, it doesn't ask for permission. It explodes, leaving nothing untouched. But while the palace buried its head in denial, Catherine's burden only grew heavier until the truth forced itself into the open. When words finally escaped her lips, they were not spoken in a press conference or a royal statement. They whispered late at night, in trembling voices, to the few she trusted most. Catherine's confession revealed a battle she had been waging in silence, a battle no crown, no title could protect her from. It was in those intimate, hidden moments that the truth finally slipped past the walls she had built around herself. In the quiet of the night, away from the endless demands of protocol and ceremony, Catherine's strength faltered. She admitted what she had long buried: the toll of the expectations, the crushing weight of being a mother, a wife, and a future queen, all while hiding the truth that she was struggling to survive under it all. For the first time, her voice trembled with the raw honesty she had been forced to deny for so long. William's reaction was devastating. The man who had always presented himself as unshakable, the heir who wore his mask of composure before the world, found himself broken in private. His grief was not only for his wife, but for the years she had spent shielding him, and everyone else, from the reality of her pain. He had failed to see the full depth of her suffering, blinded by his own duty and torn by his role as both husband and future king. When Catherine's confession reached him, his mask shattered. In that moment, he was not the heir, nor the prince. He was simply a man, watching the woman he loved break under a burden she should never have carried alone. For Catherine, the greatest fear was not her own suffering, but the thought of letting down her children. She had always placed them at the heart of her world, shielding them fiercely from the chaos that surrounded the family. The idea that her hidden struggle might cast a shadow over their innocence tormented her. She worried about what they would think if they saw her falter, if they realized their mother, seen by the world as flawless, was, in truth, fragile. It was this fear, more than any duty to the crown, that made her silence almost unbearable. Her confession revealed the humanity behind the title. In those words, the world of gowns, tiaras, and traditions faded away, leaving only a woman laid bare. For all the power the monarchy projects, for all the grandeur it represents, Catherine's whispered truth was a reminder that beneath the crown beats a human heart, a heart capable of breaking, of doubting, of fearing the weight it must carry. In that fragile moment, she was no longer an untouchable icon, but a woman fighting desperately against invisible chains. Her voice, quiet yet resolute, cut through the silence that had defined her struggle. "I can't keep this hidden any longer," she admitted, words heavy with sorrow but also with defiance. It was the first step toward the unraveling of everything the palace had fought to suppress. The confession could have remained a secret, but fate had other plans, and what followed brought the royal family to tears before the eyes of the world. The revelation didn't leak gently. It tore through the monarchy like a thunderclap. Headlines screamed, cameras flashed, and suddenly, Catherine's hidden struggle was no longer a family secret. It became the tragedy of a nation. No one in the palace could predict how quickly the truth would escape. Some say it was through a careless whisper. Others insist a letter found its way into the wrong hands. There are even those who believe it came from a confrontation too heated to contain. Whatever the spark, the result was the same. The silence that had protected the monarchy shattered, unleashing a storm of chaos and grief across the world. The media seized upon the story with relentless hunger. Every headline grew bolder, every broadcast more invasive. News anchors spoke with urgency. Newspapers splashed Catherine's name in block letters across their front pages, and cameras hounded the family at every turn. The image of a perfect princess, one who had shouldered the crown with flawless grace, was suddenly replaced with a portrait of fragility. For once, the monarchy could not control the narrative. The truth had escaped their grip, and the nation demanded answers. The reaction of the public was immediate and visceral. Grief poured from every corner of the country. Admirers who had adored Catherine felt betrayed for not seeing her pain sooner. Anger rose against those who had silenced her cries for help, and betrayal clung to the very heart of the monarchy. Millions wept not just for Catherine, but for themselves, recognizing in her story the reflection of their own hidden struggles. It was no longer about a princess, it was about every person who had been told to suffer in silence. Inside the palace, panic erupted. The royal family scrambled to reclaim control over the story, releasing carefully crafted statements meant to soothe the outrage. Words of sympathy were spoken, promises of support echoed in press conferences, but their tone felt cold, mechanical, rehearsed. Against the raw humanity of Catherine's revelation, the institution appeared hollow. The contrast was stark. A woman breaking under the weight of duty, and a monarchy desperate to preserve its armor of perfection. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. For years, the royal family had embodied a fairy tale, one built on polished appearances and carefully managed illusions. But now, that fairy tale lay in ruins. The glittering image of harmony and perfection had collapsed, replaced by a haunting truth. Behind the crown's shine lay wounds too deep to hide. The collapse of that illusion was not just Catherine's burden, it was the monarchy's reckoning. But the world's tears were nothing compared to the heartbreak unfolding within the palace itself, as the family struggled to reconcile love, duty, and guilt. Behind closed doors, grief turned into confrontation. Some wept, some raged, some plotted to control the fallout. But one thing was undeniable. The family was torn apart, each member forced to face Catherine's pain and their own failure to act. William was perhaps the most shattered of them all. He carried the unbearable weight of guilt, knowing that he had been close enough to see the cracks yet too bound by duty to stop her from falling. Anger consumed him. Anger at the institution that demanded silence. Anger at himself for not protecting her. Anger at those around him who had turned away. In private, his emotions spiraled between fury and despair, leaving him hollow. To the public, he remained composed, but behind closed doors, he was a man drowning in regret. King Charles, already fragile under the immense pressures of his reign, found himself slipping into despair. The burden of leading the monarchy had always been heavy, but this revelation threatened to crush him entirely. He felt the nation's anger bearing down upon him, accusing him of failing his family and his people. His health, already delicate, seemed to waver under the emotional storm. Every word he spoke carried the trembling uncertainty of a man unsure whether the institution he had inherited could survive another fracture. Camilla, ever calculating, sought distance from the blame. She denied any part in the silence that had consumed Catherine's struggle, insisting that the responsibility lay elsewhere. Her words, however, only fueled resentment. To many within the family, her cold detachment confirmed what they feared. She valued survival of the crown above the humanity of those forced to serve it. In trying to shield herself, she widened the rift, isolating herself from both sympathy and forgiveness. Princess Anne, however, would not remain silent. Her fury erupted with force, a sharp contrast to the quiet pragmatism she was known for. She had seen the danger early, she had warned them, and yet no one had listened. To her, the tragedy was not simply Catherine's hidden battle, but the failure of the entire family to act before it was too late. Her anger became a mirror held up to the others, forcing them to confront the choices they had made and the silence they had allowed. From afar, Harry's reaction carried its own weight. Though distanced by geography and fractured relationships, he could not escape the pain of seeing his sister-in-law exposed in this way. His words, carried through statements and private calls, were laced with both sorrow and accusation. He spoke of a family that had failed to protect its own, of a system so rigid it sacrificed love for image. His involvement reignited old wounds, deepening the divisions between him and those he once stood beside. What had once been a united front, now fractured into factions. Some blamed William, others pointed at Camilla. Still others whispered about Charles's weakness or the machinery of advisors that had enforced silence. The walls of the monarchy, which had always stood tall against scandal, now seemed to crumble from within. Brick by brick, as loyalty turned to blame, and unity dissolved into distrust. Yet even in this darkness, Catherine herself became the voice that demanded change, her struggle transforming into a reckoning. What began as tragedy soon transformed into defiance. Catherine refused to let her struggle be defined as weakness. Instead, she turned it into a message that would shake the monarchy and inspire millions. When she finally stepped forward, her voice did not tremble. Catherine's first public words after the revelation carried a weight that silenced an entire nation. She spoke not as a princess bound by duty, but as a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself. With each sentence, she dismantled the illusion of perfection and replaced it with something far more powerful: truth. For the first time, the world saw her not as a flawless figure of elegance, but as a warrior who had endured suffering and chosen to confront it head-on. Owning her truth became her greatest act of defiance. She did not blame others, nor did she ask for sympathy. Instead, she insisted that her struggle belonged to her, and that by naming it, she reclaimed control over her life. In a monarchy built on silence and secrecy, Catherine's refusal to hide any longer was nothing short of revolutionary. It shattered the unspoken rule that pain must be concealed, that humanity must be sacrificed in service to the crown. Her confession, now transformed into declaration, made her stronger than the institution that had once tried to contain her. The public's response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the nation, admiration replaced shock. Where once there had been grief and anger, now there was pride in her courage. People looked at Catherine and saw themselves, their battles, their struggles, their hidden fears. Her voice became their voice. For countless individuals who had suffered in silence, she became a symbol of resilience, a living reminder that vulnerability is not weakness, but the truest form of strength. Even the monarchy itself was forced to shift. No longer could they dismiss Catherine's revelation as private pain or retreat into carefully crafted statements. Her raw honesty demanded a response. It pushed the institution, long criticized for its rigidity, to reveal a sliver of humanity. For once, the crown was forced to bend, not through political pressure or scandal, but through the undeniable power of compassion. Amid the chaos, Catherine anchored herself to her children. They became the reason she rose each morning, the source of her strength as the storm raged on. In the quiet moments beyond the cameras, she drew courage from their innocence, promising herself that they would never grow up believing strength meant silence. The love she gave them, even while carrying the weight of her own suffering, became the proof that her spirit could not be broken. Through it all, Catherine redefined what it meant to be strong in the modern era. Strength was not the polished smile or the flawless performance of duty. It was the courage to be real, to stand unguarded before a world eager to judge. In transforming her suffering into empowerment, she became more than a princess or a future queen. She became the embodiment of a truth too long ignored, that even royalty can only endure when they embrace their humanity. But for every act of courage, the monarchy paid a heavy price, and the scars of this revelation would never fully heal. The monarchy has weathered wars, scandals, and betrayals, but this revelation left a scar unlike any other. Catherine's struggle became more than a private tragedy. It became a symbol of the fragility of power, and the price paid by those forced to carry the crown's crushing weight. In the aftermath, the weight did not simply fade. It lingered, pressing down on William and Catherine's marriage, carving out moments of distance even in their closest bonds. Though united publicly, in private they were forced to navigate the guilt, the unspoken questions, and the haunting knowledge that silence had nearly destroyed them. Their love, once untouched by scandal, now bore the mark of a battle fought in shadows. It was not the fairy tale the world imagined. It was a partnership redefined by survival. Beyond the palace walls, the monarchy's reputation trembled. For centuries, the institution had relied on the trust of its people, on the belief that the crown embodied stability. Yet Catherine's revelation cracked that illusion wide open. The public, once eager to defend, now questioned with sharper voices. Could a monarchy that ignored the suffering of its own truly represent the people it claimed to serve? Each headline, Each televised debate, each whispered conversation in cafes and living rooms chipped away at the reverence the institution had long commanded. The pressure forced change. The monarchy could no longer treat humanity as weakness or tradition as untouchable. Advisors scrambled to create policies, initiatives, and appearances that showed empathy. Yet beneath the surface, the conflict between humanity and duty remained unresolved. How much could the monarchy bend before it broke? Entirely. Catherine's revelation had forced them to address questions they had long avoided, and the answers were far from certain. The media amplified every detail, refusing to let the story fade into history. Catherine's vulnerability was replayed, dissected, and immortalized. What the palace hoped would be a fleeting storm became an unending echo, a reminder that no matter how hard they tried, they could not bury the truth again. The narrative belonged not to the institution, but to the people who saw in Catherine a mirror of their own hidden struggles. And through it all, Catherine's legacy grew. She became more than a princess, more than a royal figure. Her strength was found not in silence, but in the courage to expose fragility. In doing so, she shifted the meaning of royalty itself. For many, she became a new kind of queen not crowned by tradition, but by the hearts of those who saw resilience in her tears. The image of the royal family was forever altered. The glossy perfection of the past was gone, replaced with something raw, imperfect, and real. The crown still glittered, but beneath it was the undeniable reminder that those who wear it are not immune to the battles faced by ordinary people. The scars would not fade. They became part of the monarchy's story, etched into its future as both a warning and a testament. And as the palace tries to move forward, one truth remains. The world will never look at Catherine or the monarchy the same way again. The tears shed for Catherine were not just the tears of a family, they were the tears of a nation mourning innocence lost, confronting painful truths, and realizing that even royalty bleeds. In Catherine's struggle, millions saw their own battles, and in her courage, they found hope. The monarchy's future, already fragile, now balanced on a razor's edge. For centuries, the crown had survived storms of politics, betrayal, and scandal. But this was different. Catherine's revelation had shaken the foundation not with treachery or scandal, but with humanity. It exposed that even within the walls of tradition and power, pain lived and thrived, hidden beneath polished smiles, and once exposed, it could not be silenced again. Catherine's hidden struggle became more than a royal tragedy. It became a national conversation. Across towns, cities, and villages, her name was spoken not with pity, but with respect. People who had never felt connected to the monarchy now found themselves bound to Catherine's story. In her vulnerability, she became relatable, her pain transforming into a bridge between royalty and the ordinary lives of millions. She was no longer simply a figure of ceremony. She had become a voice for the silent, a reminder that truth has the power to unify where tradition often divides. Her story transcended boundaries. It brought together people across class, across race, across backgrounds that had little in common but this: the recognition of struggle, and the admiration for her courage to confront it openly. Catherine's strength was not confined to the palace. It rippled outward, reshaping conversations in households, in workplaces, in schools. Suddenly, the monarchy, long seen as distant, felt close, vulnerable, human. And so Catherine took on a symbolic role greater than any crown could bestow. Though she may never wear the title of queen in the traditional sense, she was crowned in spirit by those who saw in her a rare truth. She embodied not just the ideals of royalty, but the raw resilience of humanity itself. In the quiet after the storm, she stood as a queen of the people's hearts, respected not because of birthright, but because of the courage she showed in revealing her scars. This became the closing arc of her journey: resilience, born from tragedy. The suffering she endured, once a source of silence and secrecy, became the very force that redefined her legacy. The monarchy, battered and changed, could no longer pretend to be untouchable. It had been forced to confront its humanity, and in doing so, it had altered its course forever. But even as the nation rallied behind Catherine, one shadow remained. If her struggle had changed the people, what would it mean for the crown itself? Could an institution built on silence survive the weight of truth? Could the future throne, once seen as unshakable, bear the scars of this revelation without crumbling? These questions hung in the air, unanswered, haunting. And so, as the crown glimmers under uncertain skies, one question lingers. Can the monarchy survive the truth it tried so desperately to hide? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.